The Florida Citrus Hall of Fame is on a mission to tell the story of Florida citrus. The Florida Citrus Hall of Fame also recognizes people who've made significant contributions to the industry, but we're doing oral histories.
Yeah.
We've been doing oral histories probably for 6 or 7 years, talking to folks and getting stories that aren't going to be in the newspapers or someplace. And so today, you and I are just going to talk about your experiences in citrus, your dad, Tavares, Lake Region, and we'll just go until we finally run out of gas.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we need to do is Gus needs to be sure he's got everything correct. So my name is John Jackson, John Jackson, and this is
Ray Kemp, Raykemp.
all right. Now we're in business.
Yep.
He's got the deal.
You can't hear us, eh?
He's got you. He's got you. All right. Here's what I want to do.
Okay, let's go.
I want to first talk about your history in the citrus business, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about your dad, how he got involved with it, and then I want to talk about some characters that you've been involved with. Your career has covered several different facets. You've been a fertilizer salesman, you've been a nurseryman, you've been a grower, and you've experienced it from a childhood on up. So I think you said you were born in 1940.
I was born in 1940, correct, in the Eustis Hospital. My brother was born in that same hospital, but 4 years earlier it was in Umatilla.
Okay, so you grew up in the citrus business. What was it like as a youngster?
Well, you know, of course, grew up through the war and everything, and my father, when I can remember, he worked for Lake Region in the production department at the time, and he had a pickup truck. And if you went anywhere, my brother and I rode on an orange box. In back of that pickup truck, Mother and Daddy rode in the front of it. I mean, so, you know, that was the norm back then.
That's how you got around.
That's how we got around.
You went to school in Tavares?
Went to school in Tavares from the 1st grade to the 12th grade. We didn't have kindergarten back then.
Okay. So you, like most kids that grew up in the citrus business,
right,
you worked from the time you could probably pick up a hoe in grows and were involved in growing fruit?
That's right. Well, actually, yeah. In the 50s, when we had another big expansion in Lake County, several different people all around town had maybe have a lot beside their house. They had a little citrus nursery there, because we had a nursery at the house. Chauncey Daniels, which was postmaster, he had a little nursery. The Blantons, Miss Blanton, they lived across from the Civic Center there in Tavares, and Miss Blanton would actually work that little nursery while Lane Blanton worked for Lake Region. And so, you know, so we all got and my job when I came home from school, I had certain things I had to go out in that nursery and do, whether it was going along there hoeing a few rows or
rubbing off sprouts,
or rubbing sprouts, or taking the cheesecloth beeswax wraps off of budded trees, things like that. So as soon as I was old enough to do it.
Who budded the trees?
Well, Daddy had a butter.
He had a butter.
Yeah, he had a butter that would bud them.
Was this same guy kind of bud everybody's nursery?
Oh, he'd
trees?
bud everybody's nursery. Yeah, he'd go around. He probably budded the Blantons. He probably budded Chauncey Daniels trees, and because, you know, all these little nurseries, when Lake Region needed trees, they knew where the trees were. And because I remember once I got 16 years old and working for Lake Region, I remember going to that little nursery Chauncey Daniels having, and you hand dug them with shovels. And you know, so I mean, you know, so Lake Region was buying trees from all those people. In return, like Chauncey Daniels, I think he may have had a grove in Lake Region too. So,
but see, now this is in the 50s.
Right.
Frozen concentrated orange juice was developed, and I think the first product was maybe available in 46, 47, something like that.
I think Jerry Cloud mentioned to us one day, remember, somewhere during the war, right after they came, the government came into his dad and somebody else was responsible for making the.
They finally got it going.
Right.
And B&W was probably the first juice plant in Lake County, and Golden Gym was hauling juice there, fruit there, and then Golden Gym got so big they built their plant, and Jerry Brown got the plant in Eustis. But
and Lake Region's fruit went to Plymouth Citrus Products, which is right beside Snowcrop, which is a Coca-Cola owned company.
I think the first juice plant was in Apopka there.
Right.
And they got started.
Correct. That's where Jerry Cloud said the Snowcrop plant's where they developed the juice. Right.
Yep. So when you were going to plant a tree back then, you had to rely on the quality of the nurseryman to make sure that if he said you were buying a Valencia on rough lemon, there's no way you can tell if that's a Valencia on rough lemon when it's growing in the nursery. So,
and a tree back then, the trunk of it was about like that.
Yeah, a small tree was a 3/4 inch diameter.
A 3/4 inch diameter was about the smallest you'd plant.
Yeah,
correct.
So if you're buying trees from Chauncey Daniels or Blanton or Kemp, you felt pretty confident that you're getting what they say they are. You know, so that was probably one reason why these nurseries were so successful. Plus, there were no regulations in place. Heck, a 4-H'er used to grow their own nursery trees as a 4-H project and then be able to sell them.
Right. Well, when I was in FFA, I started out. That was my project, FFA. I hired the budding done, and I had a small nursery enough to qualify for state farmer's degree, but then the freeze hit it, and the 57, 58 freeze hit it my senior year in school, so kind of went downhill a little bit.
You got an education right off the bat.
Off the bat.
Freezes were something that we really had to contend with.
That's correct. That's correct.
So in the mid 50s, they started the Budwood registration program,
right.
and later on, but you still had a knowledge of and a love for citrus nurseries.
Right.
When did you start your nursery at Turkey Lake down there?
Let's see. Of course, my father and Herbert Stone. Well,
that's right.
My father and C.C. Tarberry, which was kin of the Tarberrys from Lake Wales. C.C. Tarberry's production manager when my daddy first came to Lake Region, and they started a citrus nursery. And then later on, when C.C. retired, Herbert Stone came in and bought C.C.'s half out. So Daddy and Herbert Stone were in business together, and then.
Now, was that nursery down on Woodley Road here someplace? Where was the first nursery?
Well, they had it at a bunch of different spots. They had it at spots where they clean up a piece of land and leave a grove there for a person to move to another spot and move to another spot.
Okay, so their nursery wasn't in one location like Blanton's Hilltop was forever.
Right, not till
you took over.
Not till I took over, yeah. Because before they moved over south of me, they bought this Key Scales property on south of my property now, on Mulehead Lake. They had a nursery there quite a few years, and then when I took over, I bought Herbert Stone's out in early '74, and of course then my father passed away, and I was forced to the nursery business real quickly. And unfortunately, I lost Herbert within the next year or so. He had cancer, so it was.
So you're on a steep learning curve.
I was on a steep learning curve. That's correct. And then, of course, I tell you what, I went up to Eichelberger's a few times, talking with them. So, they were very helpful too. So, I mean, you couldn't ask two brothers any better than those two guys.
Kaufman, not Eichelberger.
Kaufman, not Eichelberger.
Yeah,
right. But I knew the Eichelbergers too.
Yeah, but John and Frankie,
Kaufman.
they'd been in the nursery business for a long.
Yeah. Right. And
we were talking this morning with Ann Rao.
Right.
And one of the things that came up several times was that even though you were all in a business, there wasn't a competitive atmosphere.
No.
It was a sharing deal. You could go up and ask Frankie anything, and he'd be glad to share with you and save you from having to make the same problem.
Well, and one thing about it, back then, I know all the time Daddy and Herbert had the nursery or whatever, if Frank and John needed X number of trees of some sign and a rootstock, they could call Daddy, and if Daddy had them, Daddy would dig them and they'd pick them up and finish filling their order, or they'd do the same thing with Kaufman's. Kaufman could fill one of their orders, and Lake Region bought buku of trees from Frank and John.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're right. It was no combativeness back then.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, we all in this thing to survive. If I can help you survive,
That's correct.
You help me survive.
Oh yeah.
So you were in the nursery business. You still had groves. You still had family groves that you looked after.
Right. Yeah, but yeah.
Were you like when you got out of, you went to Gainesville, right?
I went to University of Florida, right, and I got out. I graduated in '62. Thank goodness, because Daddy called me and he says, you better graduate because we just had a freeze. So thank goodness I did.
So times were a little tough when you graduated.
Times were a little tough. I had a job. I went to work for Superior Fertilizer out of Tampa, and that was probably one of the major fertilizer and chemical plants in the state at the time. It was a co-op at that time, and later on it became a private corporation.
So what was your territory? How big an area did you have to cover?
Well, when I first went to work, I was just a bug checker for part of a year for Pete Stearns in Winter Haven. And all the groves he had, whether it was up here in Lake County or whether it's in Polk County or whatever, I'd check for rust mite and all the spider mites and all that and report back to him. And I tell you what, Pete Stearns was, I've never seen a guy like him. I went to one grove and I reported some rust mite. Pete says, yeah, you should have seen those rust mite as you went over the hill before you saw the grove because they were so heavy. I mean, he didn't need the spider, he didn't need the glass.
the clouds of them. Well, that must have been a kind of a different deal because now you're learning from someone besides your dad. Obviously, before you went to college, your citrus education came in the front seat of a pickup truck with your
front seat of a pickup truck. That's correct.
So now, and this has got to be good for you, Ray, because now you're exposed to different part of the industry.
That's right.
And you met as your career as a salesman developed. You met a lot of people that.
Well, my second year with Superior, I was moved to Fort Pierce, and Wally Long. Pete Stearns at one time, when I was in Winter Haven, he worked at the experiment station for a while, then he went to work for Superior. Wally Long worked at the experiment station in Fort Pierce, then went to work for Superior, and I worked with him for about a year, kind of doing the same thing, and actually then I was responsible for trying to do some selling. I did a little selling over there too, so I was doing both with him.
Did you ever know Buddy Johnson?
Oh yeah.
Buddy, did he come after Wally Long, or did he? Buddy graduated from Gainesville.
Buddy graduated a little bit after me.
Yeah, in '68.
Well, Wally Long was still working when Buddy came back, because Buddy's dad ran the tractor. Superior had a fumigation business going, and Buddy's dad was the one that ran the tractor for Superior.
Yeah.
Going all over the state.
Yeah, they had a caretaking business, but
correct.
Sherwood did that.
Sherwood, that's what.
Yeah. Right. He came up and, as we digress to these things, he treated Blanton's nursery.
Right.
And I got a call. He said, "You got to come out and see this." So I went out to the nursery, and they methyl bromide and everything else, and treated the nursery.
Methyl bromide and chlorpicrin.
Yeah, for the odor. Yeah, right. And so after they did it, in one part of the nursery, there was hairy indigo like you couldn't believe. And I said, "What?" He said, "I know we treated this, and come to find out that hairy indigo seed is so tough that just disking it wouldn't scarify it. Right. But the methyl bromide was enough to break the seed coat down. It didn't kill it, but it broke the seed coat down, and damn thing germinated. So Blanton's had hairy indigo in spots that they weren't really looking for. But
of course,
anyway,
that just produced some nitrogen for him.
Yeah, but anyway, so you're selling fertilizer,
Right.
and
Right.
then you got in the nursery business.
Got in the nursery business, and right.
And quit. All right, well, let's talk about your dad. Your dad was an institution, and for some people, following your dad is difficult, and for others, it's exciting and it's fun, and you're appreciative. So, your dad, you said, was born in North Florida.
He was born in a little town called Ocilla, which is outside of Monticello, and he went to school in Monticello to the 9th grade. That's when he quit, and he went to work for Monticello Nursery, which the Mayhans own, and that nursery produced pecan trees, produced citrus trees, because Monticello had orange groves on top, orange groves, grapefruit groves, satsuma on top of those hills all around Jefferson County back then. So, and then in the early 30s, that's when he moved to Lake County and went to work for Howey Company.
So he went to work for William J. Howey.
Went William J. Howey, and we lived in Orange Blossom, which is labor quarters of Howey. And there's actually a picture of one of those books that one of the ladies wrote on Howey Company.
Yeah.
It's either on page 21 or 24 or 25 that it shows the citrus nursery. And I know because Daddy ran the nursery for him, and I know that's my daddy. Look, 21. That right there.
Okay.
Because I got pictures. I got pictures of my brother and I with him. That's the way he always dressed. That's his typical dress back then too.
Now let me tell you something I found out kind of interesting. I was at the museum,
right,
and they had some stuff from Howey there, a lot of stuff. In fact, they had a book of tickets that Mr. Howey had, and so if you were in Chicago, he'd give you a ticket, and the ticket was a train trip to Howey.
Right.
You could take it in 1920, 21, or 22.
Right.
But then they had something where he was selling golden lime trees.
Huh.
And, I don't want to belittle Mr. Howey, but, you could propagate a tree and call it whatever you wanted to. And
I can tell you a story on that.
But anyway, so Mr. Howey is selling golden lime trees. Have you ever heard of that or what?
Never heard of that, but you know.
That picture was planting golden lime trees, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but anyway.
Could be. Well,
Your dad could probably tell us. He probably said.
I do remember after J.B. Pratt hired my father, and we moved into Tavares in 41, going back to Orange Blossom because we still had a couple aunt and uncles that lived there, and the horse-drawn carriages were still in the barns out there. That the people that he'd give tickets to come down, he was trying to sell them in Orange Grove, and one row was 1 acre. Grapefruit up front, Valencias or Hamlins in the back, and he'd plant the grapefruit up front because it's more green,
lush
tree, correct. And but yeah, like I say, I do remember those horse-drawn carriages.
So your dad and the family lived in the area. You were talking before that there were kind of designated sections on Orange Blossom there, and where management would live on one part of the road, and behind would be workers and so forth. But
yeah, interesting. You're right. You had a row along the road and a row in behind those houses. That was in the right going in, and that was the laborers. And of course, you had your outdoor john. Each of them had their own personal outdoor john. And on the back porch, there was a pitcher pump. And you went in to eat, you pump water up in the bowl, wash your hands. I mean, that was the water source for the house, that pitcher pump and that shallow well. And and it's interesting to see the luxury that Mr. Howey lived in that Howey mansion. But in turn, that was the normal way people lived. So I mean, he wasn't mistreating anybody by no means.
Yeah.
I mean, he was giving them a house and wages and everything. So,
So do you think most of the labor force lived there?
Oh yeah, most of his labor force lived there.
Okay.
Right.
How long did y'all live? Were y'all in?
Well, like I say, Daddy probably lived there. Well, Daddy moved there in early somewhere in the early 30s. So 7, 8, 9 years he lived there. And that's where he met my mother, because my grandfather with his kids on my mother's side of the family was one of the he worked for Mr. Howie at the time. So I mean, that's where they met, and then we moved to Tverry's in 41.
Okay, and in Peggy's book here, she has Mr. Howie dying, I think, in 38.
Does she, in 38? Okay.
And C.V. Griffin had moved into the Howie picture by then,
right.
And so I think, as she said, C.V. inherited the Howie organization,
right.
Which means that he got the assets, but he also got the debt.
Yeah.
Evidently, Mr. Howie lived high and spent more than he took in the last few years.
Well, he probably did. And who knows, when he passes away, somebody else can't manage it like he can economically either.
And can you imagine trying to sell investments during the Depression? People barely had enough money to eat feed themselves, much come down and buy a grove.
Well, that's right. And the people that did have a grove, they may not have been able to pay him production cost, or and I don't know, who knows what grapefruit and oranges were worth back then.
Yeah. So your dad left in
41.
And Mr. Pravat hired him as assistant production manager with Mr. Tolberry.
Under Tolberry, correct.
At Lake Region.
C.C. Tolberry, correct.
Okay.
Right.
And this must not have been too long after that he became the production manager.
Yeah, he was production manager. But C.C. retired, I think, somewhere in the late 50s. And Daddy became production manager, or maybe the mid 50s, somewhere along. I'm not sure.
But see, a lot of people watching this video, they talk about the production manager and everything. And here's how I kind of view that, Ray. When I graduated from Gainesville in '68, the problem then was that it was a year after the '66, '67 crop, which was so huge, the price was depressed.
Right.
There weren't many jobs, but when you graduated from Gainesville, the prime job was to be a production manager.
Right, that's right.
And I describe that's a fighter pilot of the citrus industry, right? They're the ones who make the decisions. They're the ones that ride the groves and determine when to spray and fertilize.
That's right.
If you couldn't be a production manager, okay, you went into fertilizer and pesticide sales, because you were the ones that were providing a lot of technical information for the fighter pilots to make the right decisions. Right. And when I graduated, there was a vacancy for a county agent in Lake County. And that was my third and last choice.
Right.
Why be a county agent? They were way down the list.
Right.
So I took the job. First of all, when I graduated, they hadn't gotten everything worked out here. So I was an assistant fighter pilot in Fort Pierce.
Oh, gee.
And see, you would have handled that nicely, because you grew up in the Grove, and I grew up in Orlando.
Right.
I had no idea what I was doing, none whatsoever. Well, and when the job came to move here, Ray, I said sure, but I have trouble with all you guys that thought you wanted to be a fighter pilot. Let me tell you, when I started to work as a county agent, the day I started, I became a faculty member of the University of Florida, which gave me 22 days paid annual leave, all kind of holidays. I was a civil service employee. I had medical plans. I didn't get to work until after all the production managers and the salesmen were already beating themselves to death in the Grove. I went home, and y'all were still riding around the Grove, and I'm thinking, and that is the plum job? I had the plum job.
Well, I guess the reason I didn't go into production is, let's see, Daddy was production man, I know, in '56 when I was 16 years old. So he was production man a few years before that. But that was when 16 years old, you could go to work for Lake Region in the summertime.
What'd you do?
Well,
put boxes together?
No. I got on that truck we called a doghouse, and we were at the Grove at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we worked from 7 to 12, 1 to 5:30. Then we came in, so we worked 10 hours a day. We hoed orange trees. We did Scuffalo and Idaho, and Daddy convinced me not. So,
That was not a career for you.
You may want to do something other than getting out here in this Grove end, the work end of it. So,
when did Lake Region have hand spray crews? Did you ever move up to that level?
I did one summer. I know we had a. Well, Daddy bought Turkey Lake and planted it, and we had a two banger John Deere, putt John Deere, with a two spray hose, 2 men on it, and you're spraying oil. And I remember I'd drive that tractor and I'd start nodding off the seat and those guys would just spray me, and then we'd switch and I'd do spraying. And so, but that was a neat job. And the old MP90 oil, the cow spray,
yeah.
MP90, that was the stuff you wash your hands off with in the summertime. But yeah, that was a neat job.
The kids grew up doing that, and also I remember. See, my mentor when I got here was Bob Klingbill. I was lucky.
Right.
Bob found me.
I remember that.
And
I remember Bob.
He nurtured me through that, and he ran the spray program in Golden Gym, and
Right.
so almost every kid that graduated or went to Umatilla High School, worked at Golden Gym. But it's like half the kids in Tulare High School worked for Lake Region.
That's correct.
And that was just the normal practice. Did y'all light heaters when you were in high school like they did in Umatilla?
We did some, but Lake Region didn't have. I think Golden Gym had a lot more heaters than Lake Region had.
Dixie told me they had 40,000 heaters to light.
I can believe that. But they were up in the northern part. Now, if you go in the southern part, I got a friend that grew up in Bay Lake, and they had a lot of heaters down in Bay Lake. But the geographic area where Lake Region's grows were more in the central part of the county, and there weren't the number of heaters.
They all went to wind machines. Mr. Pravat had wind machines.
Oh.
You had wind machines.
Right.
Fun pieces of equipment, right?
Yeah, Paul Leonard would maintain Pravat's wind machines. I remember that.
Oh,
yeah.
We can talk about those.
Yeah.
And wind machines came in 2 general categories. One, the motor was on the ground,
right,
and the other one, the motor was up top.
Yeah.
And
they're still sitting out there up in the air, 3 EOTs with 2 engines on top.
And can imagine what it was like to try to crank one of those things up on a cold night. Who was the little guy that worked for John High? They always sit climbing up on the wind machine. I can see him now, but anyway.
Was it Joe Bob Swaffer?
No, it was a little guy. Anyway.
Okay.
Joe Bob was too big to do that. But
okay.
But on a cold night, the worst job of all was to be 30 feet in the air trying to get a stubborn machine to go, And
That's right.
And but we had wind machines all over the place. It's a cute little story. One of the labels is the Peter family out of Leesburg, and they sent me some information. And one of the little sheets was an invoice for a Killebrew. It was an Aladdin wind machine,
right,
but Killebrew handled them.
Right.
And they bought that wind machine, and $4,500, I think, Ray. They set it up in the Grove, and Peter was telling me, he said, we had the wind machine out there, everything was all set. The first freeze comes along, we can't crank it. Can't get that son of a gun to go. It won't run at all. And he said, I don't think we ever ran the wind machine, but that machine is still in the Grove, and it's known as Judas. It let us down and betrayed us.
Yeah.
And you can appreciate what it was like.
Well, all the wind machines I had out there, they were FMC, whether it was single engine on the bottom or engine EOTs. But I converted mine to LP because people would steal the gas. You couldn't keep gas. The gas tanks were in the towers. And they had a swivel you could buy on that copper line, that swivel as that thing went around. And mine were all on LP, and we were very fortunate with them as far as that goes. We never had any problem with the swivel. I mean, the tank was on the ground. We had 1,000-gallon tanks under every one of them. They had 2 engines, and they were neat, but the problem is you didn't get to use them very much because every time we had bad freezes, we had 15, 20 mile an hour winds.
They were useless.
Right.
Well, I got 2 wind machine stories, I'll tell you.
Okay.
There was a grower, Bill Gibb, I think was his name, that had a grove down at Buck Hill Road and 455 by the power station.
Right.
And he had a grove, and he had a wind machine, and he had a little trailer. And on cold nights, he'd spend the night down there babysitting that wind machine and everything else. And he told me that one night, he was getting ready to go outside and check on the wind machine, and he heard the most awful noise he could ever imagine, and the prop broke. And he went outside, and there was a prop buried in the ground outside his trailer,
Right.
and the wind machine was gone.
Well, and Paul Leonard can tell you those same stories.
Yeah.
That's the most airy thing about running a wind machine. Getting there, cranking it up, let it warm up, you revving it up, then leaving. You know, those blades, you're right, they'll go everywhere.
Well, but my favorite story is the one, I think it was Herman Turner. It might have been Wilson Parish, but they had wind machines in Umatilla.
Right.
But their gas tanks were underground, at least the way the story of it was told to me. And so people would invariably help themselves to the gas out of those machines. And so I think Wilson got sick and tired of that. He said, I'm going to solve the problem. So he went out there, he dug down and capped off the gas tank, and he buried a 55-gallon drum next to it full of gasoline and sugar, 50 pounds of sugar, right? People came on there, siphoned off that gasoline full of sugar.
Yeah.
You know, Wilson said he and Doug Sewell about 2 weeks later drove through Saltsdale, and half the cars down there were jacked up, engines pulled out of them, where they'd gotten that sugared gasoline.
Well, those guys at Charlie Bradshaw, you know, Bradshaw had a boo-coodle of wind
100%,
machines, and,
yeah.
And that was their big problem. People now their tanks were in the tower.
Okay.
And they had story after story of gasoline being stolen out of them.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean, Paul Leonard, I think, told a story about he had one cranked up and going, and he started cranking up all the others in the grove, and he heard one of them shut down, and the time he got back there, somebody had siphoned all the gas out of it, turned it off and siphoned the gas off before he could get there.
It would always amaze me that someone would spend an hour and a half climbing up a tower to pull out a radiator to get $3.20 worth of copper. If they could get a real job, they could have made more money in that same length
you'd
of time.
rather give them that money than,
right, just
and leave
leave
the
it
radiator alone.
Well, you talk about Paul Leonard, and Paul was a mechanic for the Lake Region Packing.
Correct.
And those kind of guys are really the key to an organization. They keep the equipment going. But Mr. Pravat, I've been reading a little bit about him. He must have been you talk about him putting Orlando Tangelos in people's doors.
Right.
What are some of the other memories you have of Mr. Pravat? See, there are people in the industry, Ray, and I'm don't mean to interrupt you, but in this area we were strong in co-ops.
Right.
And so the manager of the co-op was basically the baron of the co-op. And then he had 2 or 3 really key people in that co-op. And with Lake Region, Mr. Pravat was the man,
Right.
and your dad, and I don't know who ran the packing house, but they had to be the key people under him that kept the co-op going.
Right.
And then in the packing house, manager had a Paul Leonard that keeps the equipment running.
Yeah. Bob Fox sold the fruit. But on J.B. Pravat, when I bought my first grove I ever bought was a 5-row, 5-acre whole Howie planted grove. Grapefruit up front, blenches in the back. And I put the money down and got it 7-year financing through production credit. But I went to Mr. Pravat. I says, I bought an orange grove, and I'd like to put it in Lake Region, but I don't have enough money to pay production costs and wait for my fruit money to come in through the co-op. Mr. Pratt says, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me sell it for you. Then you put it in the co-op, you'll have money to pay your production costs, and then we can harvest it next year. Okay, I was okay. So he did it, and he sold I forget, I think he sold the grapefruit to Lakeland Packing. And Amos Marchant was a bird dogger in Leesburg, and he sold the Valencias to Amos Marchant. And, you know, he made sure they kept records on it. And so I received my money off first crop, and then it went into Lake Region at that point. So I mean, you know, JB bent over backwards to do things for people.
Well, and other people did. You talked about that. Let me tell you, when I bought my first house, I got here and I'd been working 3 months. So I found a house to buy, and First Family Federal was going to loan the money, but I didn't have the 20% to put up front. So Earl Kelly called your dad, who was on the board, and said, "Can you help out?"
First Family Federal Savings and Loan.
Right. So your dad goes to I forgot the man who was running it then, and said, "Hey, this guy's got a good job with the county. He's got a good salary coming in.
Right.
90%, we won't have any trouble." So if it wasn't for your dad, I couldn't have bought my house.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I'll be darned. That's interesting.
So you know, people looked after each other then. Yeah. It was something, and we talked about this before, Ray. I mean, with Ann Rao, and I think it's worth repeating time and time again that for years and years and years, the citrus packing house was the economic foundation of the community. And to varies, it was Lake Region was the house. You had some of the small ones. Umatilla had 5 packing houses. There were 3 or 4, but the packing house was such that it provided so many jobs, and a lot of the jobs were to women. It was a second income in the family.
That's right.
Packing house didn't open till after school started.
That's right.
A lady could get the kids off to school real early, go down, pack fruit on a piecework basis,
That's right.
get home when the kids were there. Packing house shut down before summer vacation started. So they could be moms and they could bring a second income in. A lot of the men worked in the packing house, or they worked in the groves, and it was just the city revolved around the packing house.
That's right. I can remember because some of the kids I graduated at school, I remember one, Hoot Gibson, he worked in the harvesting for Lake Region, and Belle, his wife, was a packer during packing season. And I mean, they weren't the only one the same way. Horace Flowers, Jeanette Flowers, their family did the same thing. So yeah, that is very common.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did mention about JB and the Orlando Tangelo deal. And you know, Lake Region at one time packed over 90% of Tangelos in the state.
Now they did that because was it Daniels who started the Tangelo?
I think W.C. Daniels, is the one that really got the Orlando Tangelo going, and and then you know they brought Tangelos all over the state in too.
But they developed a reputation for knowing how to handle them. So I was going in the direction, got sidetracked, that they must have had some pretty sharp people that ran the packing house at Lake Region to be able to be as efficient as they were, and even well up into the freezes and everything else. Lake Region kept upgrading it, but they how long was that old building been by the lake and the railroad tracks down there? That had to have been.
Oh,
I can't.
That was probably there. Some of that was probably there in the.
Pravat came in 25,
and that's about when the first start of it being built. Because there was an ice house on the lake on the lake close to the packing house, so that's where they got their ice too.
Yeah.
And of course, Lake Region eventually bought that property, because I built a house in Tavares, and I got 2 beams that came out of that. I built a double-sided fireplace, and 2 beams came out of that ice house. And so,
but Lake Region was incorporated, or the co-op was established in 1909.
Right.
And evidently in 1909, some legislation was passed that allowed co-ops to be established.
Right.
And I looked in the records, and Lake Region, Haines City, and Winter Haven were the first 3.
Right?
First three, and then Waverly came on about 3 or 4 years later.
Right.
At least those are the records that I saw. So from day one, Lake Region was a cooperative,
Right.
and of course cooperatives were so strong around here because of a lot of small growers. You know, we didn't have many big growers around here that had huge acreage. Gil Sims was a big grower. What did Gil have, 60 acres down here?
Mr. Wakeland, Mr. Wakeland was his father-in-law, right about that. But you did have, besides Lake Region, you had Wells had a packing house, and his main, it was heavy to gift fruit type, but he did have a packing house, and for a short period of time, Elma Sperry had a packing house.
Yeah.
But you know, back at probably when Lake Region was first founded, and Wells was packing, the fruit would go to Lane Park and put on paddle wheel boat, and that paddle wheel boat could go all the way to New York. Same as Fort Mason and Eustis.
Yeah.
It was paddle wheel boat at Fort Mason. I mean, so all those packing houses you mentioned in Eustis, that's probably where the fruit was loaded on paddle wheel boats.
Yeah, we haul it out of here, and then I was talking to Mike Graham up in Altoona, and a lot of this fruit from the Umatilla area was transported overland to Astor, a little town in Astor, and loaded on boats there.
St. John's River, paddle wheel boat.
Paddle wheel boat.
Right, that's the same thing, that's right.
And you talked about Sperry. Sperry had a packing house, and we have 2 labels from them. And Commissioner Smith is I think related to the Sperry family, so he's got Charger on his wall. That big black horse was one of theirs.
Oh,
so
geez.
the labels were interesting. So
well, you know, we were also, maybe did we cover the bulk fertilizer?
No.
Lake Region was one of the first ones in the state they had a fertilizer plant, and they had 2 dump trucks, and they had the Mikey spreader, and they would fill those dump trucks with fertilizer and go dump them in the spreader. So they were probably they were the first one in the state to haul bulk fertilizer.
And so why is that such a big deal?
Well, because you get out 100-pound, 200-pound bags in 100-pound bags.
Tell us about what it was like putting out fertilizer before that dumping the bulk fertilizer in the spreader was.
Well,
like.
It was. I tell you what, when I got my job at Superior, that first year, they had a warehouse in Wauchula, and once a week there was one day I had to go down there and run the warehouse, and that 20-ton truck would back up there with 100-pound bags of fertilizer, and you know, it was a chore unloading a 20-ton load into that warehouse. And
young Ray was doing that?
And Dumb Ray was doing that. And interestingly, years before that, those guys were unloading 200-pound bags instead of 100-pound bags. And now today, the only thing you can get fertilizer in the biggest is the 50-pound bag.
We were talking to Larry McCraney last week, and Larry's dad was a production manager for Chase.
Right.
And Larry would say, yeah, in the summertime, Dad would get me on a fertilizer spreader. And he said, I thought that I would be the guy that operated the gate in the back. And for people that might not be familiar with this, the way grows were fertilized then was a tractor pulled a trailer. And the trailer was a flat trailer that had a hopper in the back. And you loaded 200 or 100-pound bags of fertilizer on that trailer.
Right.
And one guy is opening those bags and hauling them to the back, and then they're dumping them in the hopper and spreading fertilizer.
While a tractor's pulling you through the grove.
And so you talk about a back-breaking job. And Larry was saying, you know, when you got home at night, you know, you weren't interested in going out and doing anything except getting in bed and recovering for the next day.
But you think about that dust grove is sulfur dust. With a duster, you'd have those bags of dust, and as that's going through the grove, you'd keep that hopper full so it keep throwing it out dust with this, you know. You couldn't get a guy to do that today.
No, and Buddy Johnson did that, and I was in graduate school with Buddy, so we talked a lot, and his wife said, I hated that. I said, what do you mean you hated it? She said, we were dating. She said, when he was dusting, we'd go out on a date that night, and all he was doing was watering his eyes. And, he said he couldn't watch a movie or do anything because it's trying to get the sulfur dust out of your eyes.
That's right.
Well, see, these were labor-intense jobs, and the bulk spreader then triggered a company. You talked about Mikey spreaders. Now they were built right down the road,
Right in
Asatula.
Correct.
And so
that was the first bulk spreader around.
And so this spreader was earmarked and geared so that you could take fertilizer either out of the back of a dump truck or was Killaroo the first one that came up with the...
Killaroo was first bulk hauler, right.
And so now fertilizer was put 20 tons in a big bin.
Right.
And you had a motor that ran the hydraulic pump or something and everything else. And so you could just dump that fertilizer in the spreader. So there was no guy hauling fertilizer, loading it all. It was great.
Right.
Yeah, bulk spreaders, herbicides had to have been something that every kid who was a tree hoe was just thrilled with.
I can remember when my senior year in college, we took a field trip, went to Polk County, and I can't think of the guy's name, but we saw the first herbicides put out. It was, of course, it's Carmex. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time we'd ever heard of herbicides. And, from there on, it started building. But
yeah, we hired David Tucker. He came to Lake Alfred. That was his
big old guy.
His expertise was herbicides.
Right.
And,
I remember him.
And looking, going that direction and putting out chemicals to control weeds was, we thought that the in and out tree hoe was the answer to everything.
Oh, gee.
but herbicides were
Boy, I can remember working the summertime at Lake Region. There must have been 10 case tractors, 400 case tractors with a Pounds tree hoe leaving every morning, heading to the Grove. And, and those guys had come just as dusty and dirty as they, end of the day.
A tree hoe is a device that sits on an arm, and it's got tines that turn around like a rototiller, and you drag it along under the tree, and it would control the weeds.
They would either go down the row or circle the tree. They'd do it either way.
And if I remember correctly, from some records that were kept, that of all the pieces of equipment that a citrus caretaker had to have, that the tree hoe was by far the most expensive because every day you were having to replace so many parts because that thing was just churning, eating in the dirt.
It was better than a rotavator is today, as far as churning the dirt.
Yeah,
you're right.
But it was a wonderful piece of equipment. But when tree hoes, when herbicides came along, tree hoes became a thing of the past. So.
Well, going back to when I was in the fertilizer sales business, I remember calling on Mr. Griffin, C.V. Griffin, in the 50s, in the 60s, early 60s, and he was still using bag fertilizer, and it took me a long time to convince him, because his deal was, I've got this grove here, and I can throw so many bags of fertilizer in a spreader and spread it, and I know how much to charge them. And I said, Mr. Griffin, you had to finally sit down with him. I said, you take this bulk spreader and you spread it, and you know how many acres you spread of that 5 tons of fertilizer that you put in that bulk hauler, or 50 acres, whatever it is. Then you divide it. You know how many trees, and you divide it, and actually you're going to be saving the grower money. And he started buying bulk fertilizer from me. I mean, I was the first one that ever convinced him to buy bulk fertilizer.
And I'll bet you when every load of fertilizer that was delivered, he had Tommy Powers or somebody from the Department of Ag checking to make sure that if you sold him an 828, he got an 828.
That's right, but yeah, you're probably right about that. But
that
Griffin's a guy you kind of walked into, you're going to be scared to death of him, but when you got in here, he was a neat guy to work with.
Well, I got to tell you my C.V. Griffin story.
Okay.
My father and C.V. Griffin were in college together at Gainesville. And both of them left. This had to have been 1920, 1921, somewhere in there. And they were in the office supply business. They sold office supplies in Eustis.
Right.
And times were tough they weren't doing too well. And so my father said, Vaughn said, I got to go home. This is killing me. So he left and went back to Largo in Pinellas County, where he grew up. And CV stayed here. I told Pop, that's when you really screwed up, you know.
That's right.
So I get the job, and my father says, well, you need to go see my friend Vaughn Griffin, old CV. And I said, okay. So I called, and I thought I got an appointment. So I walked down to went in that big office, and here's a picture of LBJ and Richard Nixon and Dwight Eisenhower.
Right.
All his buddies scattered everything else. And he sat down, and he said, Johnny, he said, I want to tell you something. He said, you're here visiting with me, not because you work for the damn government, but you're here because you're the son of a friend of mine. So we had to separate out that I was not a government person there. So 20 years or 30 years later, I get a call from Mr. Griffin. He says, Johnny, he said, I had cataract surgery about 5 weeks ago. He said, I've been out riding the groves. They look like crap. They're terrible. Can you come here and help me out? So I went down there and we rode through the groves. They were thin,
Eaten up in the greasy spot.
ratty, everything. So Mr. Griffin, I think he probably quit putting liquid lime sulfur out maybe a couple of years before, but he put liquid lime sulfur out for years and years.
That's right.
And, you know, like a lot of growers, Ray, you're recommending 10 pounds of copper sulfate per acre. Well, a little bit of bluestone's good, a lot's better, so they're putting in 4 times that. So I got Heinz Rucher over here.
Oh, gee.
We pulled some soil tests. His pH was 4.1 and 4.2, and his copper was exorbitantly high.
Gee, yeah.
So he was killing his trees with copper toxicity.
Yep.
So we got some dolomite on there and got rid of the copper. But, you know, sometimes people just can't change unless you show them a really good reason, economically or something, to go ahead and make those changes.
Well, you know, that's true. And it's amazing. Greasy spot used to tear us up here, particularly the grapefruit. And what was the DuPont product that...
Benlate.
Benlate. When Benlate first came out, I started spraying those grows. I bought those old Griffin grows with Benlate. And man, there was no greasy spot. They were nice and lush. And I had growers all around. What are you doing to those things? And you know, so I mean, you know, Benlate, to me, Benlate was the greatest product, and it didn't deserve being taken off the market, because it did nothing but thing positive for me.
Yeah, well, there's some products that we've lost. Timic we lost.
Well, that's true.
So but difolitan.
Right.
You know, we couldn't control scab when difolitan left. But,
that's right. You know, getting back on fertilizer, Wilson Tumor. I remember going in that plant when I was in college. That was the most monstrous fertilizer plant I've ever seen in my life in Jacksonville. And they'd haul fertilizer all the way down to Homestead from Jacksonville. But in Lake County, there were buildings along the railroad track. Lawrence Atkinson had one because he was a big Wilson Tumor customer. And Wilson Tumor would get those boxcars down, and they'd load them in those warehouses. And the grower in the area that had, you know, they had it where that's where he picked his fertilizer up to go spread his grows. I mean, you know, that was when they were still using bags. I mean, like I say, those buildings were all over the place around Lake County, or it was on a railroad track.
Yeah. Well, they knew how to market it and had the customers. So
that's right. I mean, they were Wilson Tumor warehouses, not the grower warehouse.
Yeah, but the warehouse was on wheels too. I mean, on rollers, right? The train.
No, most of them were. Oh, no, most of them were. They were
physical
permanent.
buildings.
They're physical buildings, and the boxcar would pull up to it, and you put.
Kind of like you unload them at Wauchula, huh?
Me unload them in Wauchula. You'd unload that boxcar into that warehouse, and then whoever, where it was Lawrence Atkinson or whoever it was, and that was his fertilizer. That's where he picked it up and went and spread it. So it was the railroad delivered a lot of fertilizer.
Yeah.
The railroad was delivering that fertilizer to Homestead from Jacksonville, the Florida East Coast.
Yeah, well, rail transportation was it. Obviously,
Correct.
All these packing houses were on railroad sidings.
Correct.
And many of the packing houses were built by the railroad because they wanted the volume of business that was shipped out of here.
That's one thing interesting about Lake Region. Lake Region had two different railroads servicing them, one on one side, one on the other side. Probably the only packing house state that had two different railroads.
And I imagine it kept the price down.
It probably did. Let's see, one is Florida, not the Florida East Coast, but Seaboard and Atlantic Coastline, I think, were the two. I may be wrong,
Yeah.
but
My buddy Phil Cross will tell me we'll get things squared away.
Yeah.
Well, Ray, every citrus grower has dates burned into their brain.
Right.
And if I told the average person out there what's so important about December the 13th, 1962, they would have no earthly idea. But when I say December the 13th, 1962, immediately your brain says the 62 freeze,
Well,
and I can remember what happened. You were in college, right?
I can remember what happened. That was my last semester in college. I was heading to class that morning, and the orange grove that we had, that Ag School had, when I first got to Florida, it was by the Century Tower. Then it moved out by the Coastal Med Center, where it's a cancer building now.
Yeah.
Well, they had the overhead sprinkler system running that night. And I hit that sprinkler system on my way to class, and and thank goodness I didn't crash into anything. But that was my big memory. And the second memory was my father calling me and says, "I hope you're graduating," because we had a bad freeze.
And that freeze, when you look at the situation in Lake County, and you can tell the story of Lake County based on freezes and 94, 95. We go back to probably the first real devastating freeze was 1835, and in 1835 we were growing citrus in Charleston and Savannah. Was very common. But the 1835 freeze moved us into Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Orange Lake, and then the 94, 95 freeze devastated Lake County. I mean, it was unbelievable.
I'll tell you a story about, you talk about raising in Georgia. My former, because he's deceased, my former brother-in-law was a University of Georgia graduate, and he found a book in the Georgia Library, and it was about a lady from London, England. She was in a boarding house in St. Simon's Island, Georgia. And so I'm looking out the second story window, and there's a skeleton of an orange tree that got killed last year, and this is 1896. So second story, so that was a big orange tree. So
62 came, and we...
62 was tiddlywinks compared to 83, 85.
Yeah,
because I remember...
But it was a devastating freeze from the perspective that we hadn't had anything of that extent
right,
up until then.
The 57, 58 freezes were bottom freezes, and hilltops, there was still fresh fruit all through here in Lake County. But the 62 freeze, I remember Daddy went in, he had a temple block, and it got knocked. Well, he went in and hedged the sides of it and topped it, and it came right on out.
Well, see, what the 62 freeze also showed us was that if we had paid attention to some of the basic horticultural theories that pruning is a rejuvenating process.
Right.
And we could prune these trees, and actually it was better for them to be pruned rather than getting 30 feet off the ground and having to get big ladders to pick them and everything. And so it was a tough lesson for some people.
Well, it was. It definitely was. You're right.
And and every citrus grower dreaded cold weather. That was that was your overall thing. You went through burrowing nematodes. You went through Mediterranean fruit flies. You went through even canker, but freezes were something. And two things about freezes. Number one is most of the time you could have a few days to decide whether you need to spray for rust mites or not, or put that fertilizer out. But on a cold night, you didn't have the luxury of waiting. Well, maybe tomorrow I can do this. You had to make decisions now.
Right.
And do I spend this money? Am I really going to turn my water on with 20-mile-an-hour winds and all those things?
You're talking about burrowing nematodes. I remember when Daddy and Herbert Stone still had the nursery, and they were developing a budwood block, and they bought the sign trees of Franklin Ward to establish their budwood block. And about a year or two later, Franklin Ward called Daddy and says, we found out that we had burrowing nematodes, and your budwood trees have burrowing nematodes, so the state's going to come up and push them and treat the land. So they lost their budwood block. But in turn, Franklin told them, so as soon as you get ready to replant, you let me know, and we will replace every one of those trees. I mean, that was the good and bad, unfortunately, being the nursery.
Well, Franklin Ward was like that.
Oh, you darn right he was.
Franklin Ward was one of a kind. He felt bad that they found canker in his grove, his nursery, as if it was his fault,
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, and like I say, he didn't hesitate to call Daddy and let him know. And he let him know before the USDA did.
Before Clyde Mosteller showed up to,
that's correct.
to check that and get rid of it and everything. So you were in the nursery business in ’77.
Yep.
And so that was the freeze that we had snow here, right?
Yeah, I remember I went home we were getting everything ready during the day, and I went home to get something to eat and head back out there right at dark. Going down to Dewey Robbins, and I call you and says, is this what I think? And I kept seeing something white on all those orange trees out there. And I had to verify it with you. That's what it was.
Snow on the trees.
That's right. I got pictures of snow. My kids coming out there was playing in the snow the next morning.
Well, a lot of these freezes, there's some positive on the other side. Like we talked about in '62, we learned pruning and rejuvenation.
Right.
And if I'm not correct, in '76, '77, the price for solids was 25 cents a pound.
That is correct.
And the industry was losing their rear end. And it was the cost squeeze had gotten to the point where you couldn't make any money growing citrus. And after the 80s, the 90s, the '77 freeze, the price of solids went up to 85 cents or 90 cents, something like that. I mean, it jumped up to $1 after the '62 freeze, but it went right back down. But when it went up after the '77 freeze, it never went back down to those really low levels.
Never went back. 50 cents would have been a good price at one time. Well, I think the first grove I bought when JB sold it to me, the Valencias was sold for 50 cents a pound solids. So, right. 50 cents back then was good money.
But the 77 freeze kind of brought the price up and everything else. But when the 80s hit, it was entirely different situation.
Actually, in the '77, you're talking about, you're better off letting your fruit fall to the ground and be fertilizer than to sell it at what they wanted to give you. Some people sold grapefruit for 10 cents. 10 cents a box, not pound solids, a box.
How could they get it picked?
Yeah.
No. So you remember 82, 83 and
Christmas of 83, January of 85. Christmas of 83 never came because we worked 2 solid days and nights.
Yep.
It never came.
I put the forecast on. I'm not positive. I almost think it was a Friday, but it doesn't make any difference. I put the forecast on December the 23rd.
It was a Friday night.
Friday night. So I put the forecast on, and I don't remember, but it was like 22 to 26 or something like that. And we knew it was going to be bad. I woke up that next morning, and we bought a house that was torn down in a grove, and that Cole and English had over there. And anyway, and it had double hung windows in it. And I got up early Saturday morning, and those curtains were standing out from the window. And I said, I think we might have a problem with the forecast. And I got down to the office as quick as I could, and the forecast, it was down to like 18 to 22. And everybody was going completely crazy trying to get things going, and it was just disaster. And after it was all over with, so it only got to 16 in the office in Tavares, and it was below 28. We didn't want to really think that it was as bad as it was.
Well, I had had a little party for all my employees, my nursery employees and grove caretaking employees, and gave them their bonuses, Christmas bonuses, and told them we'll see you Monday. And a friend of mine came by. He was a college friend of mine. He wanted some fruit to take to his dad who lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we had what we call a fruit basket. So we picked him all sorts of fruit. And about the time we were picking, I had a call for Maurice Patrick. If you know, Maurice Patrick was sold for W.R. Grace. And he lived in Lake Alfred, had groves in Lake County and in Polk County, and he was a director at Haines City CGA at the time. He called me, says, "Have you heard the forecast?" I said, "No." He's supposed to get down to single digits. I said, "Maurice, it can't. I mean, here we're in short sleeve shirt, we're picking fruit. It was 80 degrees that morning." I said, "It can't." He says, "It is. Can you get some people to fire the groves tonight?" I said, "Gee, Manetti, I'd given the money last night, but I will get on it and see if I can."
Yeah, they're all headed to Alabama for Christmas.
Well, anyway, I went over to Polk County where some of them live, and I scrounged up a firing crew. So we fired groves 2 straight nights. And you wonder why. There's some guys that were real loyal to you when they had the Christmas bonus and they could have been gone. And
Christmas Eve they're out firing.
That's right. The Christmas Eve they're out firing groves, and I couldn't see anything any better. They're just a bunch of good guys.
Well, Ray, that is a segue to a really good point. Back in those days, every time I look at grower organizations and growers and everything else, it was a family deal, and not just immediate family,
right,
but those guys worked with you and not for you.
That's correct. That's correct.
And they were part of your family.
Oh yeah.
As Ann Rao pointed out, I can remember Daddy going over to the jail on Sunday night. Your daddy did it all the time.
All the time, that's right.
All the time. These guys would get a little carried away, and you'd have to go get them out. But he knew Buddy Alls, and he'd call Buddy and say, "I really got to have Joe Bob out. We got to put some fertilizer out."
That's right.
Buddy would say, "Fine, come get him." And that was the way it was. But But these guys worked with you. They didn't work for you. They were part of your family.
That's correct.
And you treated them like part of the family.
That's exactly.
If it had been the other way around, if that guy would have come to you and said, "Mr. Ray, I hate to tell you this, but such and such happened. I really need $100.
Right.
It would.
Oh, you give it to them.
No question asked.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you're right. No questions asked. That's right. Exactly.
So we got through the 83, and a lot of people pruned. They were optimistic.
Yep.
I'm not really sure if those trees were really alive. We'll never really know, will we? Because,
no.
Because the next year at 85,
we had some grove we chainsawed and they were coming out. And if we hadn't had January of '85, I mean, you'd have lost a few trees as groves. But most of those groves would have come back out.
They were new flush, they were exposed, they were wide open, they were just extremely vulnerable.
Right. I had a navel block that I didn't get, a bone navel block, I didn't get the chainsaw in it. And it grew some. And then '85 hit. And believe it or not, I still had a few of those trees. They were navels on sweet ceiling, and a few of those trees still survived. Not many, but a few did.
Yeah. And so here during the 80 freezes, Farina finally comes up with a way that we can put water out, shows us that we can put water out and probably save citrus trees, at least saves the trunk and the scaffold limbs. And
well, you know, in a sense, we were doing that way before then, because back in...
Well, you were in the nursery with water.
Back in 1964, when I was in Fort Pierce, yeah, Daddy and Herbert had that race pullover system, that 3-inch pipe where you sprinkled and then you could pull it over and latch it, and you know they'd irrigate grows. But he used the pullover system in his nursery, and he would freeze the nursery over. And I remember coming up here from Fort Pierce, and they have a brush, 2 brushes, and you'd put it in, connect it back up, and the water would run through there, and it'd push the dirt and everything out of the holes. So you'd have all the holes working. And we call that running the rabbit. And you'd go get the rabbit and go back under the next one. And so I helped him on that.
But you were putting out a large enough volume of water.
Right.
And you were basically covering the entire area, because in a nursery, you planted from, border to border.
Well, right. So, but the idea of freezing, the concept had already been developed.
Right. You just have to use it correctly.
Correct.
How many growers tried overhead in '62 in mature grows? It was disastrous.
It was a disaster. But that time I'll tell you about in '64 when I went back to Fort Pierce that night. And on Shin Road, it completely defoliated the orange and grapefruit groves on Shin Road in Fort Pierce. They never turned the water on in the nursery in Lake County. Cold went overs. How do you figure?
I don't know. So Ray, we go through the freezes, and we're I don't know how optimistic we were, but Lake County still had some citrus trees here, even after '89. But
yeah.
But then again, when you start to think that maybe you could grow a citrus tree here, and you're starting to build a little confidence, all of a sudden we get greening, or a disease. And how many of those have we gone through, Ray, that we've found a way to get by,
The first thing that hurt us was canker. Before greening came along, I had $750,000 worth of nursery trees ready to go,
and the state
and we
destroyed
had canker.
Them. State destroyed all of them?
No, the state never destroyed a tree of mine. They put an embargo. You could not move a tree.
Well, they destroyed.
But if you had canker in your nursery, you got paid for all your trees, whether they're liners ready to either your seed bed or your unbudded liners or your budded trees, you got paid for everything. We that had clean nurseries that didn't have canker got zero.
But you couldn't move your trees.
You couldn't move your trees. It was an embargo on moving some nursery trees. Where is the justice in that? There's not.
You know how David Coughlin to do what he did with Sumter Electric when they cut the power off in the '89 freeze. But just sometime it was sad. And
I'm the first one that took him to court on the '89 freeze.
Good. That was interesting.
Kaufman got with me and he wanted me to file first.
Yeah.
So I filed. They did the filing, but I'm the one. And of course, let's see. Then we had four.
Sumter shut off your power.
Yeah, they shut off my power all night, off and on. We had a motorhome out there, and we had the microjets running, and I had the envelope that my wife had been given a Publix or Winn-Dixie turkey or something where she worked, and she had that envelope every time it got turned off, and when the power came on, I kept a log of that, and.
Well, once they shut off the first time, you never could get your sprinklers going again.
We got it going again.
Oh, really?
But some lines would freeze and you'd blow lines.
Yeah.
But on the north end of the grove, I had a grapefruit block, which happened to be the same little block that there was going to be the Budwood block with Ward's nursery trees. You remember? We talked about. That was low, and the period of time. All that 8-inch pipe going down there, that kept running the whole time. Those trees didn't get hurt at all. So microjet would have saved us if it had run it all night.
Yeah,
because that was the proof right there.
I got calls all night long.
Yeah, yeah.
My grow was doing pretty good, then Sumter Electric came along and shut me down.
Yep.
And I can't get it back going, They shut me down in DC Water's parking lot, as bright as it's not downtown Orlando. They're running all the power there,
Yeah,
and we're killing our groves.
That was one of my arguments too. But no, I had electric, and we'd get it turning back. As soon as power came back on, we turned it on, and like I say, I blew lines in places, but they probably turned us off 7 or 8 times that night.
Yeah, well, they cut a lot of people off once, and
their excuse was that squirrel running down the line.
Yeah,
they had a bunch of squirrels out on a cold night.
Well, it's changed it, and greening has now hit the industry, and
right.
And I know that.
Greening was our Waterloo.
You and I, we suffer through all those, but we have no desire to suffer through greening. I'm optimistic, Ray. I talked to some young kids, and they seem to think that they can lick it, and that's great. I hope they can, but it's got to be a huge challenge for them.
I think they're going to lick it, but in turn, I don't quite understand the triploid and all this they're talking about. But you've got to develop these varieties that it doesn't affect, because
spraying and killing psyllids and looking at slow release fertilizer and fertigation and all those things. That's just a temporary deal.
I bought a 3-point hitch sprayer, and I'd get out on that John Deere tractor and crank up the air conditioner at 1 o'clock in the morning and go up and down spraying my grove at night. I guess I was doing some good, but still, if my neighbor didn't do anything, a week's time I found psyllids all over the place again. So,
I'm telling the story of Lake County citrus. I don't want to be a county agent again. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to go out and say, Ray, we've done the testing, and unfortunately, you got greening. And you say, well, John, what do I do? What am I going to tell you,
John, you need to be the county agent like Bob Norris. Back then, because Daddy was good friends with Bob Norris. And at times you didn't have these problems that we're talking about. You may want to, Bob says, you may want to put some tobacco stems on it. And so bring boxcar loads of tobacco stems. I remember grow was about this deep in tobacco stems. And that nicotine sulfate in it probably killed some bugs I mean, times were just different, and the MP90 sprays in the summertime. I mean, that suffocated almost everything.
Well, we thought it was a challenge to control greasy spot and rust mite, and then
right.
I wasn't here, but I guess back in the 50s, you were spraying 1,500 gallons per acre to control purple scale and red scale. They were just inside the tree.
Exactly.
And
some
couple of guys come back from China with a couple of aphidas wasps.
Right.
We turn loose 17,000 of them, and within 3 years, you can hardly find purple scale or red scale.
That's right.
Somebody's got to find that for the
And then
silver.
snow scale came along the same thing.
Yeah.
So
So we just somebody seemed to find, and I'm thinking, we finally got smart. We're not spending money to pay you to push out infected trees.
Right.
We're putting the money into these brilliant scientists who are going to find a research answer. Right. I'm not criticizing the scientists. I mean, they're working hard, but this is not an easy problem.
No, it's not.
And people think, well, this is rare, but it really isn't, Ray.
Yes.
You can't find an American chestnut tree in this country because that fungus came in and wiped out every American chestnut tree. And the only things that we have are some hybrids and everything else out there. It literally destroyed
that hybrid,
a whole species.
Alachua, nursery in Alachua developed.
Yeah, Bob Wallace's dad. Yeah.
And I got a friend that comes down, and he lives in Tavares in the wintertime, and he's a Christmas tree farmer about an hour out of Niagara Falls. And he bought some of those chestnuts and took back up there.
Really?
To New York.
So,
you talk about Bob. We're talking about Bob Norris. Little story on him. Going in '62, prices weren't real good, and he made a talk at Leesburg Kiwanis Club, and he told him one thing. He made a little statement. He says, "What we need is a little freeze."
And your dad said, "Bob, you ain't talking like that again."
I said, "You overdid it," he said.
Well, when I came here, I was filling some huge shoes. Bob Norris was an institution.
Yes, he was.
And Bob worked for Mutual for maybe a year after I got here, and then he moved full time to North Carolina, Little Switzerland.
Little Switzerland, correct.
And I would send him my newsletter. Bob always sent me back the most encouraging, upbeat letters.
Is that right?
Oh, you're doing a great job, and I was in A&P the other day, and this is it, and he'd send me a little bit of stuff, but he was the most positive, upbeat person, and really made me feel good because there was no way that I was competing with Bob Norris.
No.
But he made me feel like that you're making a contribution. It was really, really important, and Henry Swanson the same way. Those guys carried a kid through. I didn't know nothing about
Lake
this.
County and Orange County are probably very fortunate. Had two of the best county agents in the nation back then.
Bob and Henry, and both of them were so great for me. It's kind of unusual that Henry Swanson is the only county agent in the Agricultural Hall of Fame and the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame.
Right.
And Bob Norris and Tim Herner are about the only county agents in the Citrus Hall of Fame. And Henry Swanson and Bob Norris both received Superior Service Awards from the Department of Agriculture, and I don't think not very many agents ever get that. So what a foundation to draw upon, and what a history. So I'm glad that I got my 38 years in, and it was fun.
Well, I tell you what, Bob Norris had a lot of county agents come through Lake County and become county agents in other counties.
He trained a bunch of folks.
Well,
yeah.
There was a McCown out of Umatilla. Did he go to Gainesville, or was he a county agent somewhere?
He was a state specialist in Gainesville
that's what he was,
with
yeah.
Fred Lawrence, and Fred Lawrence was from Gotha.
Okay, yeah.
And he was a state specialist in Gainesville. Larry Jackson worked up there. He was a agent in Polk County, and he went to Gainesville to be a specialist. So, you know.
Larry Jackson was the one that graduated Florida Southern.
Right.
And when I was my senior year, he had a lot of classes with me. He was working on his master's, I remember.
Yeah. He went.
I had to help him through a lot of those classes too. He got a master's degree, and I just got a grade, and you had to help him.
Yeah, but if you survived Louis Ziegler and Jim Sewell, you know you earned your degree.
And Wolf, Dr. Wolf.
He wasn't there when I was there.
Oh, he wasn't. Let me. Wolf. He was subtropical fruits. He was at Homestead Lab experiment station for a long time, and then he was professor at Florida when I was there. And I took a subtropical fruits, and we'd take his tests. Nobody would pass them. Nobody would pass them. Finally got to a test, and I studied, and I studied, and I studied, and I studied. I finally passed one of his tests. He came in there that day, and he gave everybody their papers back. He says, but I'm not counting them because some of you guys had the test. Found out that the guys that were in AGR had a copy of the test, and they passed it too. I went to him after that. I said, Dr. Wolf, I've never studied so hard in all my, and I finally passed one of your tests, and you're going to throw it out. He said, yep, I'm going to throw it out. And he did. And I wasn't an AGR.
But you had the satisfaction of knowing that you passed that damn test.
That's right.
Legitimately.
Legitimately. But gee, Minnie, Christmas, he would actually -1 for a misspelled word.
Yeah, well, Ziegler was tough on that too. They were tough on it. But it was a good foundation.
Oh, it was.
And graduating.
Of course, Cresdord was there when he was head of this department when I was going through.
But see, you got the exposure, and we got the exposure. John Gerber was my major professor when I was up there. Got a master's degree, and their job was not to flunk you. Their job was to try to mentor you and encourage you. And
was Gerber teaching when you were there?
Yeah.
Okay. See, he was just there doing research when I was.
Yeah, he caught a couple of graduate.
Well, he may have. Okay, right. Yeah. But 62 Freeze, he had an experiment going on down in McIntosh.
Orange Lake.
Yeah. He had heaters in half the grove. And he came back that morning, and we got to talk to him. How'd it go? He said it didn't do very good at all. The part of the grove that had the heaters was just as cold as the grove that didn't have the heaters. But in the spring, he came back just smiling. He says the grove part that had heaters in it, they're growing out and sprouting. The other part is not. So he showed the heat going through the trees saved the trees.
Yep. It was my graduate with Gerber was really enlightening, and he would go to Camp Blanding and get surplus stuff to run it, and we had weather towers at Orange Lake, and every Tuesday I drove down to Orange Lake and dropped a neutron probe down a hole, and this was a deal that measured water content,
right,
and determined water use of citrus trees, and but those kind of experiences, A, you gain an appreciation, B, you have lifelong friends. Buddy Johnson and I were graduate students together in Sufford, and so it was a fun time. It was a different time, so we enjoyed it. So
one thing I should have brought up when we were talking about the Howie Company. My dad's telling me the story. I got two stories on the Howie Company. There was, of course, Daddy did work the nursery, and Mr. Howie had planted a piece of land, and so they went out there and planted the grove, and they planted it till dark, and they went back to Orange Blossom, left the equipment, came back out there the next morning to get the equipment. And the guy sitting there with a shotgun. He said, y'all go get Mr. Howie. So they had to go get Mr. Howie. Mr. Howie had to come out there and he talked to the guy and letting them have the equipment, but he thanked Mr. Howie for planting him in Orange Grove. and then another one, as we remember riding through the Howie area with Daddy.
And those groves, Ray, were not 100-acre blocks, and so it wasn't a matter of you being off by half a mile.
No.
You got off a few rows of trees.
A few rows of trees, that's right. But going down Dewey Robbins off 19, where Dewey Robbins turns right, all that block on the right there as you're turning, Mr. Howie planted that as Excelsior Dunkin' grapefruit. And he sold it for the cure for rheumatism.
Now, do you want to see the advertisement for that? Stacy at the museum has the information on that, just like you said, the promotion on it, Excelsior grapefruit.
I need to go out there, but it was Excelsior Dunkin', correct?
Yeah.
And that is one variety of Dunkin' grapefruit you find in the books.
And so you can make claims then, you know, that whether they were, the FDA didn't know whether Excelsior cured rheumatism or not, but if he claimed it was worth a try.
That's right.
Well, Dunkin' grapefruit was a good variety anyway,
you
know, so it was
It was the only variety back then.
Yeah.
There wasn't any other variety back then. But
well, we had to wait for someone to find a bud sport to get a marsh to come out of there.
Gee,
Now we're selling the heck out of red grapefruit. Well, Ray, we're going to quit. We could talk forever.
Oh, yeah.
You and I go back a long ways, and I've got a picture that will be on the website. And we could talk about this, but it's a picture of you and John High with a snowball fight in California.
I just had to redo my office because we had some termites come in, and we had to termidor around the house and everything, and then redo the office. Replace some wood, and I found that picture too just recently.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've done some fun things and some exciting things. We've been on some trips. We've survived freezes.
Right.
And this is, to me, what has been the most enjoyable part of my job.
Yeah.
I was a city boy, but the industry accepted me. They put up with a green kid. They gave me some encouragement, some ideas, and I had one hell of a time interacting, but it was all about people like you that made my life so enjoyable. It was like I was part of the family, and I appreciate it.
Well, I tell you, citrus industry is a hard industry to leave. I mean, I can't fight it anymore, but I don't know how to fight it. But
no,
it's a hard industry to leave.
It's time. Yeah, sometimes you just have to say, okay, Lord, I'm turning it over, and I'm going to have to do something else.
That's right. Maybe I need to go to Georgia and buy some land and plant a grove.
Thank you, Ray.
You bet.
Thank you, Ray.